Hello and welcome to Board Now's Cult Television Reviews, and on this video I will be continuing with Buffy the Vampire Slayer. I am on the first season and I am getting very close to the end now, and this is episode 11. It's called Out of Mind, Out of Sight. A nice little play on words there. So yeah, I'm very near the end of season 1. There was just the 12 episodes in the first season, and so I can tell you once I've finished the first season, I will be doing a little roundup video of season 1 and my overall impressions of it. I'll be ranking my sort of the episodes in order basically, and sort of picking out certain things like maybe the best character of the season, things like that. So it's something you can join in as well, and just a cap off of the season type video, which I think I'll do with all the seasons. But yeah, we're going to be rolling with it. I mean, I've already watched the 12th episode, which is Prophecy Girl, so that should be up in the coming days. And before moving on to the second season, I will be doing that roundup video, so you've got that coming very, very soon. But I'm going to get into this one. It's Out of Mind, Out of Sight, as I said. It's an odd one, this one. It obviously plays to a lot of the themes of the first season, of the early seasons in general, to do with bullying, the sort of consequences of that. But it's always one that divides me. You know, I think, I mean, I sort of have a soft spot for it, but I think a lot of people are quite down on it, or not so much down on it. I think they maybe just dismiss it sort of thing as, and I mean, I'm not going to say it's one of the better episodes, but it's just one that I have a soft spot. I kind of like what it's doing anyway, even if it's not completely successful in it. So we sort of have an odd sort of mixture here on the directing, writing stuff. The director the name is Raza Badiyi, who I'm quite certain never directed another episode again. And sadly to say, I can't quite say if it's a woman or a female, but yeah, Raza, I'm pretty sure this is his or her sort of first and last directing credit on a Buffy. Now the story is credited as by Joss Whedon, but as tends to happen quite a lot with TV, you'll have like the original story concept, but then you'll have a teleplay, which is like the TV version of a screenplay. So essentially what they're saying in this case is that it was Whedon's idea originally, and he certainly had input in the script, but the actual script wasn't by Whedon. It was by Ashley Gable and Thomas A. Swinder. I'll go with one of those two. So they're credited with the teleplay, the two of them. And it's worth pointing out then, I think Whedon, as the main showrunner on Buffy, would have had probably a hand in the majority of the scripts anyway. And certainly moving forward, I think the first season, the show was still very much finding its feet, finding its sort of groove, its identity. So, but certainly I think moving forward, I think a lot of it was patterned on Whedon, and he was that sort of visionary. But yeah, so I think it maybe shows here then we've got, you know, these kind of odd names attached to this one. So the setup is then you have a guest star who's Clea Duvall, who many people know, a familiar face even if you wouldn't know her by her name. And not too long after this episode, she was in The Faculty, which was a big sort of sci-fi horror teen film from 1998. Robert Rodriguez, a bunch of sort of fresh, faces, kind of seen as these were the future stars of Hollywood. So you had Elijah Wood, you had Josh Hartnett, Laura Harris, various, and Clea Duvall was in there as well. And I mean, some of them went on to bigger things than others, but it was kind of this thing, and it was described as the Breakfast Club meets the invasion of the body snatchers at the time, which, yeah, you can see that's a pretty good way to put it. But it's a decent movie. It's always one that entertains me when it's on, and that was one of Duvall's early roles. And she's the sort of actress you see pop up in like everything now, but in really tiny roles. But she's always great. She's really watchable, really likable, brings a lot of substance to her roles. So she's kind of the first big guest star in Buffy, although I guess at this point she wasn't a name herself. But she plays Marcy, a girl who literally, she was an outcast. People bullied her, people just essentially ignored her, and including the teachers. We see in one scene, she's putting her hand up in class, and everyone else who put their hands up, they get noticed, but she doesn't. And so it literally becomes this thing where she feels invisible, so she becomes invisible. So that is kind of the monster of the week sort of gimmick, that Marcy is invisible and she's taking her vengeance out on Sunnydale High. So she's going around. Early in the episode, she knocks out Mitch, who is Cordy's latest sort of flunky, with a baseball bat. She attacks various other people, and her rage ultimately heads towards Cordelia. Cordelia as the popular girl in the school, who essentially, we see flashback scenes again where Marcy was trying to hang around with Cordelia and her group, and they weren't paying any attention. She would try and fit in with them, but they just mocked her. They dismissed her. I mean, ultimately, the sort of the worst thing in the world, as far as Marcy is concerned, is the fact that she feels like a non-entity. It's almost worse than if someone was insulting you, sort of thing, because it's that thing of, well, if they're insulting me, at least they're paying attention to me. So it's that kind of thing, and we see flashbacks. Example, why Marcy, why essentially she becomes invisible, literally. So again, it's very much, this is the metaphor of the show, and that's what Buffy is as a show. The fact that this kind of supernatural element, the demon elements, whatever you want to say, they become like a metaphor for the experience of a high schooler, or the experience of growing up, and the pain of that. So the fact that Cordelia is her prime sort of target, that being Marcy's, really brings Cordelia into the focus. And so this is one that's always talked about as being a big Cordelia episode, because I mean, for a lot of there's some episodes she's not in this season. She hasn't become, even though she's on the titles, she hasn't become, it doesn't feel at least like she's become a fully fledged cast member yet. But as many people know, in the future she does become a regular, like she's in pretty much every episode, obviously till she leaves. But at this point we're still sort of getting there, but she is one of these characters that sort of shows the difference between a Whedon show and many other shows on TV. This character in other sort of teen shows would just become sort of fodder. She would just be the sort of stereotypical mean girl, and she would ultimately get her comeuppance, sorry if I can say it right, and that would be it for her. That would sort of be her role or the end of her arc. But she does actually have an arc in Buffy. She grows, arguably even more so on the spin-off Angel when she goes there. But so this is seen as a big episode in moving Cordelia towards that, in moving her closer to being an established cast member, in essentially her sort of involvement in the Scooby Gang. So essentially, as you know, a protagonist, someone who we're gonna, potentially care about, and it brings up the sort of past of Buffy. So the episode is set in the run up to the spring fling, and the crowning of the Maybelle Queen, which obviously in high school circles is considered a really big thing. And Cordelia is running for that, of course. It's a massive deal to her. And I mean, there's a scene early on where Xander and Willow are sort of mocking the whole thing, and who would want to be that? And Buffy, just says, I was, as in she was at her old high school. So this is a sort of an important episode in referencing the past, referencing what Buffy used to be, and kind of showing what she is now, that sort of contrast. And Sarah Michelle Gellar is great in this scene. She really has this enthusiasm about that past, saying, that it was a nice sort of time. And it's this interesting thing with her, Xander and Willow, although they're close friends. I think in this scene it's shown that Buffy is sort of still a bit on the out, still a bit of an outcast at school, that she still longs for that past, even though she has moved on and sort of has a greater purpose. And there's some fun banter, and Xander and Willow are just so cute when they're telling this funny Cordelia story, with which Buffy doesn't get because she wasn't around then. So it's a funny little scene because of how they're acting, but also it's this kind of this isolation for Buffy, then she is sort of out of the loop. And as I said, Sarah Michelle Gellar does a great job of selling it. And I think what this episode shows, and I think probably the best part of the episode for me, is just the fact that it is showing that Buffy was once the Cordelia of her high school, and that Cordelia is now kind of in that position. So it's almost like that they're like the contrasting paths of the characters, but how they come into interaction in this episode. And it obviously says something. Then Cordelia moves on from this position. She just doesn't stand still, like Buffy didn't stand still. It's almost like fate and destiny sort of moved them forward. But at the same time, things had to happen for them to move forward, and they've gone about a different route to it in a way. So they're almost like polar opposites at this point in time. But there is a link in their past. And actually, one detail I picked up on was the fact that Buffy, early on in the episode, she actually bumps into Cordelia in the hallway and obviously embarrasses her, and Cordelia gives her, crap for it. But it sort of reminds me of the pilot when Xander, is all clumsy and bumps into Buffy sort of thing. And I just like this thing of characters colliding, and it's a different sort of thing for Buffy, where I guess it's only around Cordelia where she feels like a klutz. She feels, I mean, I'm not sure if she always feels this way, but she's made to feel quite low by Cordelia. Whereas I think around a lot of other people, she is a very confident character. and certainly she knows how to stand up to Cordelia. But I think in this episode, certainly it's played that way. Then she's a bit of a klutz. I mean, you could argue it's a little out of character, but I think because of what the episode is doing with her and Cordelia, then it works quite well, really. But it's just funny how you literally have Buffy colliding into Cordelia in high school, so their paths are like intercepted, sort of thing, quite literally, which is a big part of what the episode is about. It's also worth mentioning, I'm pretty sure this is the first appearance of Harmony in this episode, who takes a ridiculous bump down the steps at one point, courtesy of Marcy, invisible. But yeah, Mercedes McNabb, great name, playing Harmony, who is Cordelia's best friend at this point, who does have a surprising arc of her own, not just on Buffy, but also on Angel. Another character you look at here and you think, well, she's just a filler part, she's just the kind of obnoxious best friend, and that's about it. But you'll be surprised at what happens to Harmony in the Buffyverse. But I'm quite certain this is her first appearance here. Mercedes McNabb as Harmony, Cordy's best friend at this point. So yeah, all sorts of threats happening. So at one point, Harmony, as I said, is pushed down the steps. She tumbles down. And it's a long drop. It's those big steps you see on the opening credits. And it's a little bit cartoonish because of the fact that you sort of think, because I think they're meant to be like concrete steps or maybe stone steps. So you've got to think, well, she could potentially die here, or if she didn't die, you sort of thought, well, she'd be severely injured, but she actually doesn't seem that bad, I have to say, after the fall. So that's a little rough. But anyway, there's a lot of funny stuff around this because Principal Snyder is in the episode quite a lot, and I like some of his lines and his paranoia over the school getting sued. And I like after, I'm pretty sure it's Mitch, the guy who Cordelia's dating, who gets injured with the baseball attack. I like Snyder's line. He says something like, "No one dies in this school, at least not this week," which is just brilliant. And then later on, when I think when Buffy wants to go and investigate further into it and wants to sneak away, Willow and Xander cause a distraction, by bringing up the subject of Snyder and the school being sued. And they bring up the fact that Mitch's like father or something is like this high-powered attorney locally, so they're really playing on that. And Snyder even comes back to it later when Harmony has tumbled down the stairs. He runs up and says, "Don't sue." That's sort of literally the first thing he said. So there's some great stuff with Snyder in this episode. But yeah, so much about is Cordelia and Buffy, and how eventually Cordelia is brought into the library near the end, and she realises that she does actually need the Scooby's help and Buffy's help, whether she likes it or not. And that's an interesting sort of touch where she's sort of repulsed by this group of people. She's repulsed by being in a library, full stop. And this is just like totally like Cordelia type logic. The fact that she's so concerned about being in a library because it's seen as like not a cool sort of place. And another thing actually to pick out is the fact that Cordelia does form an attachment to a teacher in this episode. And it's one of the early scenes. It's really funny again. So they're in class and they're doing like a Shakespeare play. And they're just giving their thoughts on the play, and Cordelia, gives her own sort of logic on her version of the play and the character. And it's this really shallow, superficial take on it, where she's, calling him self-obsessed, and she uses this analogy about how she once hit someone with a car, or like it was a car sort of thing, but it was her running into them. And Cordy says something like, they're like, oh, it's all about me, and but what about me and my trauma, sort of thing. And it's a great scene because it's really funny, because it is Cordelia just dialing, her self-obsession up to 11. But it's also a great scene because it actually shows Cordelia is taking an interest in class. She's being active in the class, and in her own way she's making an effort, and the teacher does appreciate that. So it is actually a good scene in this way, and it is showing. I mean, I guess we saw a bit of that in Nightmares, although that could have been a dream. That could have been part of Buffy's dream, but there was certainly a setup for it there where, Cordelia seemed to be a more active, more interested in classes. So we are seeing her slowly grow. And she seems to form a bond with this teacher, Mrs. Willis. And I think that's another interesting thing with her and Buffy, because if you remember in Teacher's Pet, Buffy, formed a bond with Mr. Gregory, another teacher, and obviously he was sort of killed off. So you can see the contrast in their paths here. And Cordelia's teacher is attacked by Marcy in this as well. When obviously invisible, she chokes her and she survives. But there is this contrast where the teachers that both Buffy and Cordelia have bonded with have both been attacked, essentially. So there are these contrasts, these sort of links on the path. Very, yeah, so some very interesting character stuff. But we finally get to Cordelia approaching the Scoobies and Buffy saying, I need your sort of help. And that leads to the big kind of, the big sort of heart-to-heart conversation with Buffy and Cordelia, because it's agreed that Cordelia should go out and do I think it's called the May Cream thing, as normal, because, their logic is then if she doesn't, then, well, two things. One, it looks sort of a bit off. And the other thing is they can use her as bait, which is obviously something not Cordelia's not up for, but Buffy's obviously there to sort of protect her. So it leads to when Cordelia's getting dressed or going off to get ready, her and Buffy have this big sort of talk. And Buffy brings up her past, but she also questions, Cordelia, how can you be lonely when you're this popular? And Cordelia really strikes a very, very sort of poignant note where she sort of says, sometimes, I'm so popular, I feel lonely, I feel like no one really knows me, sort of thing. All these people say they like me, but they don't really know me. And it's this whole speech which sort of says, then, yeah, of course. I think it's sort of a similar idea to like celebrity and how sometimes you can be so ridiculously famous, and the fact that sometimes people are just surrounding themselves around you because you are famous, because you are seen as this talent or whatever the case may be. So it's this idea that they're just I mean, at one point, Cordelia describes it as the popular zone, so they just want to be in that area. But they're just there for that reason, for the superficial reason. They're not there because they're interested in Cordelia or hanging out. And as she said, they don't even know me, sort of thing. So it can be very sort of lonely. So it is a sort of a profound moment. She undercuts it a bit because Buffy then asks her, "Well, why do you try so hard to be popular then?" And she says something like, "Well, it beats being alone," sort of thing. But in any case, it's certainly a sympathetic moment for Cordelia, and it's a good sort of character beat, the fact that she recognises this, and she's maybe not so much in denial. She's aware of the fact that there are sort of downsides to being popular and what have you. And then it's actually when she goes off to get dressed, and her and Buffy are having this sort of conversation through the door, then Cordelia actually gets snatched by Marcy, and we sort of get the big finale where her and Buffy are both tied up, and you get the surgical sort of instruments and the threats from Marcy. And it's quite a well-directed scene. I quite like the fact that the bit where Buffy sort of tells Cordelia to be quiet, and she essentially uses her instincts and her whereabouts to sense where Marcy is, and she gets the crucial sort of blow. So showing sort of good sort of Slayer instincts in that scene. And essentially she wins the day, and the FBI shows up, and they were shown earlier in the episode, so that they're onto the whole Marcy thing. And it's quite a nice ending with her going into this special sort of classroom for invisible students. And, she obviously opens up a book and all that. And sadly, this is one of the things they never return to. When you watch this episode and the end, you thought, well, this could have been something they did return to in the future. They could have gone back to Marcy, but they never did. I mean, I think it's just one of those things where it was a season 1 episode, like a random Monster of the Week type plot, which afterwards, when they started getting into the mythology of the thing more and all these big arcs, then they just didn't think to go back to it. They just didn't pay much thought to it. But it could have been an interesting one to go back to. And we get the scene at the end where Cordelia kind of sincerely apologizes. And but then Mitch shows back up. He's back on his feet. He's injured, and she says, "You're not hanging out with these losers." And then she covers herself, says, "No, of course." And she comes up with some excuse, and they walk off. But it is a sincere moment again, because before Mitch comes along, I think you can tell that Cordelia is sincerely apologising. So it's a big episode in moving her character forward and etching her towards kind of being a Scooby, if you like. And we're going to get more of that stuff. And Angel also has a little cameo of this in this episode, and him and Giles sort of have a sort of a thing. And this is the episode with the line from Giles where he says, a vampire in love with the Slayer, how sort of poetic, which is a great line actually, but it's sort of building to the finale because him and Giles are trying to research and find out what the Master's plan is, and the whole sort of what the end game is, the sort of plan, I've lost the word now, but I think you guys probably know what I'm talking about. So a little cameo for Angel. I guess it moves him a little bit closer, a little bit more forward. He saves the other Scoobies at the end when they're trapped in a thing. So I guess if I'm giving my thoughts on the episode, I'd probably say it's hit and miss. I think it's a good idea. I think casting Clea Duvall was a great choice. I think she does bring a lot of vulnerability to Marcy. I think she's one of these where she's very subtle, where it's appropriate then she's invisible because she can sort of disappear into a role, if you excuse the pun. And she does make you very sympathetic, but also you can feel the rage. And I mean, the good thing about the episode is that it's not so light and black and white. It's not so then, oh, well, she was bullied, she was ignored, so yeah, go and get them sort of thing. You know, essentially what she was doing was wrong. So it does show that light and dark. It does show you on the one hand, yeah, she has been mistreated, you know, this isn't on sort of thing, and they are sympathetic up to a point, but it also shows then, no, her actions are wrong, the way she reacts is wrong. But Clea Duvall's very good. I really like her voice as well in the invisible scenes, and she, you know, the scene with Buffy and Cordelia, she's actually quite sort of menacing, like when she laughs and what have you. So the idea is quite a good one. It connects to the season. And I mean, again, I think the Buffy and Cordelia scenes are the highlight of the episode. But the episode overall is just okay. I think there are some clunky moments. I think there are some cheesy moments. I think the flashbacks don't really work. There's some quite poor directing, some quite poor editing. I mean, there's a scene with some weak sound editing where, you know, Buffy and Giles are in a scene and I can't remember the line, but then it goes into the other scene and they're sort of still talking. And I mean, there's nothing wrong with doing that, but when you hear the line when they've gone into the other scene, I think you can tell that it's been dubbed in like post editing, and that's really sloppy. So yeah, the direction isn't great, and bits of the writing are not great. I think it's more the direction in this episode, and those cheesy elements are still there. It still feels like quite a throwaway episode, even though, as I said, the Buffy Cordelia stuff is good and it certainly moves Cordelia as a character forward, and I think Buffy as well to an extent. I think it was nice to have that reflection on her past. I think they're starting to get more into her past, like the stuff with her father in Nightmares. So it's a solid episode. It's not one of the season 1 standouts, but it's certainly not one of the worst episodes. I think it does serve a purpose. So I'll probably go about a 3-star again on this one. It's hard to go. I think to go below that would be a bit harsh. I mean, I could give it 2.5 stars maybe as a middle ground, but you know, I do quite like this one. I do have a bit of a soft spot for it. So I think I will be generous this time and give it 3 stars. So that's my review of Out of Mind and Out of Sight. So yeah, please let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And I will be returning with the final episode of Season 1 in a matter of days, and it's a biggie. It will be Prophecy Gal, and not long after that I will be giving my roundup of Buffy Season 1 right before I start on Season 2. And just to remind you of other stuff I'm doing at the moment, I'm currently reviewing the HBO teen series Euphoria. I do that 1 per week. It's obviously a new show, so episode 6 of that is coming up, and it should be up early Wednesday, so look out for that. And more stuff as well. I recently did a film review of It Chapter 2, the new release that came out this week, so that's currently up if you want to check that out. and many more film and TV stuff on the way. But for now, thank you for listening. Goodbye.